Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about something that is a big focus of mine this year during my creative residency with Adobe, and that is mindful design. I'm going to be going over exactly what it is, why it's important, and different ways that we can design more mindfully as UX designers. So let's get right into it. So when I'm talking about mindful design, I'm not just referring to meditation apps and things like that that are inherently mindfulness apps, but more I'm talking about how to design with humans in mind and digital well-being in mind for any industry. Even a banking app, for example, can be designed mindfully. So there's no formal definition of mindful design, but it definitely falls into the same realm of ethical and humane design. I would define a mindful design process as making decisions based on your knowledge of how the human mind works. A designer who understands brain science and behavioral psychology can design products that actually facilitate the intentions of the person using the product, as opposed to stifling them, distracting from them, or even pushing another agenda. And I bet the first thing that comes to mind when you're thinking about all of this is social media and apps like Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Pinterest, all of these things that are really tech giants in the industry right now and are probably coming to the forefront of your mind because of documentaries like The Social Dilemma, talking a lot about ethical tech and ethical design. And so while yes, that is so important, so many of us use those apps, so many of us are manipulated by those apps, and even though we may not want to get rid of them, it's so important to be so mindful about how we use them, and if we do happen to be a designer on one of those teams, how we're designing for them. But even if you're not a designer for one of those huge social media companies or a social media app in general, mindful design is still super, super important. Because any digital tool that someone is using has the opportunity to have a positive impact on digital wellness or a negative one. And so, like I mentioned, baking apps can be designed mindfully, as can apps in the healthcare industry, productivity apps, email, everything that you can think of that can be used on a device has the opportunity to be designed mindfully. So let's take a look at something that was designed very mindfully so that you can get a better idea of a real world example here. This is Tempo, the email client that promotes focus. And the reason we can tell right off the bat that this was designed mindfully is because its whole ethos is getting you off of the app faster, helping you get your email done in just a few minutes, help you focus on it, get it out the door, and actually leave the app. And that is their idea of success. And so this is the opposite of these social media business models that we're looking at, where getting you to stay on the app as long as possible is their entire business model. This Tempo app is extremely different. It's on the opposite end of the spectrum, where their goal is to help you achieve your goals quicker and more painlessly so that you can move on with your day. So let's go over a few ways that you yourself can design more mindfully, whether you're working on a team or just working individually. Some of these things are things that you can start learning about, and others are things that you can implement into your process right away. The first is learning more about cognitive psychology and how the brain really works. So I took a few classes in psychology in college, and I honestly wish that I would have taken more, because now that this is something that I'm really interested in, I am going way outside of working hours to read and learn and listen to things to get more knowledge about cognitive psychology. So specifically, the things that you want to get to know are how the brain handles attention and distraction, learning and memory, expectation and surprise, rewards and motivations, as well as the role of emotions. So once you really understand how these things work, at least a little bit better, then you'll be able to design to facilitate these processes instead of working against them, or even worse, taking advantage of some of the weaknesses in the human brain. So if you're looking for a good place to start, I would highly recommend Scott Riley's book, Mindful Design. It talks a lot about cognitive psychology, and even better, it's in the context of UX design. And so that's something that I would highly recommend if you're interested in getting more into this topic. The next thing we can do as designers to be a little bit more mindful in our process is nixing things that are manipulative in nature. So, for example, A/B testing is something that's really common and is actually really unethical when you think about it. It's basically a human experiment done to humans who did not consent to be experimented on. And this may sound dramatic, but step back and think about exactly what you're doing. What you're doing here is manipulating different parts of any type of product, whether it be the price of something, the layout of something, the content itself, like headlines or things like that. And you're not really being transparent about what one person is seeing versus another. You're just sort of doing this experiment without letting any of the users know that you're doing it. And so this is something that, unless we can think of a better, more transparent and ethical way to practice this type of experiment, then we really shouldn't be doing it at all. So I know that many of you aren't going to be able to change the practices of the organization in which you are working, but it's just something to think about, and maybe find some references and some interesting articles about this that you can show to people in your workplace and see if maybe you can get the conversation moving about a more ethical way of doing things. And another way to design more mindfully is to actually get to know your users on a human level. So this is the last thing I'll talk about here, and we'll go into 3 different ways that you can do this. And this is great because it's something that you can do sort of regardless of your organization. You can take certain steps, even if they're small steps, towards each of these 3 things in order to make your process a bit more mindful. So the first thing is holding conversational interviews. So with lots of research, we do some sort of interview process, and this type of interview where it's more conversational, you get a little bit deeper, you are looking at the person face to face, whether it's in person or, of course, during a time like this over Zoom, and you're really getting to know them on a little bit more of a human level rather than just exactly what they do within a product, but actually start to understand what's going on around them while they're using the product, the why behind the things they're doing and the goals that they have, and just get a little bit deeper. The second thing is empathy mapping, and this comes from those conversational interviews. Once you kind of get to know the user a little bit more, then you can fill out something like this, which is an empathy map. And I have a whole video that goes over the process of empathy mapping and this specific example. But essentially, empathy mapping is a version of a user persona that just goes a little bit deeper into empathizing with your user more so that you can put yourself in their shoes and understand the context around which they are using the product that you are designing. This will help you make design decisions that are better suited for your users and not necessarily just based around assumptions, but actually based on facts about how they're using the product and what they want to accomplish and just some of their deeper seated goals. And lastly, you can use project-specific design principles to help you design more mindfully, especially if you're designing on a team or have stakeholders that are super involved in the project. So based on your empathy map, what you'll do is come up with a few principles that will govern your entire project. And so these can range from, talking about the visuals, the content, the voice, sort of like the tone of the app or experience, what is actually included in terms of the features, what it feels like. It can really govern any of those things. So the goal here is to set guidelines to help you stay mindful throughout the whole process. So defining ahead of time what's really important to keep in mind, and then anytime you have to make a design decision, you can go back, reference these principles, and see what is going to be the most mindful choice moving forward. To make this a little bit more clear, I'll go through a quick example. So for the previous project that I worked on, Essence, which is a smart diffuser app, I determined that an important principle was distraction-free. And so, yes, that's going to be important much of the time, but especially for the people I was interviewing who are going to be using this product, there were lots of distractions that they mentioned, and almost every single one of them mentioned that their goal was to be more calm, peaceful, less distractions, and things like that. And so I really wanted for this app to not only facilitate that experience through the aromatherapy and the smart diffuser itself, actually creating a calm environment, but the app that they're using to control this device should be equally distraction free and equally as calm and grounding to use. So as I was going through and designing the app, I had to always come back to this principle along with a few others and make sure that my design decisions matched up with this goal and didn't work against it. So for example, one thing that came up was notifications. So I had to decide what notifications were going to be important and helpful, not just for the users, but for the business involved as well. And so I had to really balance those two things, the mindfulness for the users and the value of notifications to a business. And so I did this by really looking at my principles. Let's take distraction free. I did not want any distractions when it came to this app that were unnecessary, but at the same time, I thought that it would actually be helpful for the user to know when they were out of a certain oil that they had already been using. And so notifying them of that and giving them a quick link to repurchase it would be something that would help both the business and the user, and not necessarily be a distraction, but actually be something helpful that could make the process more seamless. So that's just an example of how you can use notifications mindfully. Always kind of check it against the principles that are important for your specific design project, and make sure that you're not just thoughtlessly throwing in notifications, even if the business involved and your client thinks that it's important. Try to compromise there and make that decision more mindfully. And while we're talking about business needs, I want to throw in a caveat before we wrap up this video, which is that mindful design and business goals can live in harmony. They do not have to negate one another. And I think that's a really important thing to understand and to work towards as someone who is trying to design more mindfully. So whenever you're working with a client, or whenever you're even just thinking about business value as you're doing a project, then you really have to think about the relationship between the person using the product and the product itself, and therefore the company and technology in general. What we want to do as designers and developers and anyone working in tech is to strengthen that relationship instead of making it a manipulative relationship. That ultimately is going to strengthen the value of the business and the relationship between the business and the user or the customer. Let's take that notification example. Let's say that the business decided, no, we don't really want to listen to you. We want to do tons and tons of notifications. We want someone to come into the app really often, keep repurchasing things. Let's do a notification at this time. Let's always do a notification when we come out with a new oil, all of this stuff. So if someone using the product starts to see that this app is sending them notifications all the time, what do you think they're going to do? They're probably going to disable those notifications. But if we had just used really mindful notifications, just a few that are actually really helpful, then the person's not going to be annoyed about the notifications, but they're actually going to find them helpful, and they're going to respect the business or the company even more for providing them with that helpful nudge, as opposed to a bunch of annoying nudges that are clearly pushing an agenda for the business. And so that's why these things can work together so seamlessly, and why it's so important for them to do so. We can actually keep business priorities and mindfulness priorities front and center at the same time and have them work together. So I would love to hear what you guys think about this topic, or if you have any questions, definitely leave them below. I know there are tons of things about this that I wasn't able to touch on in this video, so I hope to be making more videos about mindful design in the future. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!